Colleagues, again, welcome to the fourth and final in our series, Practice Transitions from a Doctor's Perspective. Hopefully you've been able to listen in and view a few of the other audio clips. But for those of you who maybe are just joining us for the first time, I'd like to again welcome our CEO of the Williams Group, Dr. Gillen Cockrell. Dr. Cockrell had a very large multiple doctor, multiple location practice here in the Midwest. And so we thought he had a really unique perspective. Not only has he owned and run and managed a very large multifaceted practice operation, but he also sold it 6 or 7 years ago. So he's also sat on that side of the table where many of you are thinking about heading in the sale of your practice. And so we are really appreciative, Dr. Cockrell, of you taking time out of your busy role as CEO to join us today and share some thoughts. Our fourth and final in the series will be on real estate. It is sometimes almost tangentially related to these transactions and comes up close to the end of the negotiations or the documentation, but it's a very critical piece, we think, of the private equity transaction and of a peer-to-peer transaction. It has its own unique qualities in a peer-to-peer transaction. And so I've asked Dr. Cockrell to share a few thoughts because I believe in almost all of his locations, he and his partners own the real estate. So the real estate adds another dimension that, of course, is separate and distinct from the sale and ownership of the practice. So again, welcome, Dr. Cockrell, and appreciate you taking time out of your busy day. And we're looking forward to your insights on what to do with the real estate now that we've got the practice sold.
Well, thank you, Bill, and it's a pleasure to be here once again. So I would call this part of the transaction the icing on the cake. And so you worked hard, you've made your deal, it's taken several months. Don't overlook your real estate. A lot of optometrists, especially in maybe less metropolitan areas, own the real estate that they practice in. Spend a long time paying for it. Many of you have beautiful offices that you're very proud of, and the organization who purchases your practices recognizes that, and they recognize the value of your location. And so there are many times very happy to lease your building, and second part of that equation is for how long. Most of them will establish fairly long-term leases, a minimum of 5 years, with then options to continue to lease. So now you've had the luxury of locking in an inflation hedge, because the rent can be renegotiated, and a critical part of that is, can I negotiate those increases up front? Well,
yes.
You probably can with good representation. And so now we're probably, most economists in the world right now believe that most economies are going to head into an inflationary period in the next several years. One of the ways to help protect you somewhat from that inflation is to continue to own your real estate and look at all the components of how that might be structured. So having representation in completing that real estate lease transaction is not only extremely valuable, worth your time to think about and structure properly, to the advantage of both parties. This is the thing where you don't want to fall victim to one of the 7 deadly sins of greed. You've got to make it. In my experience, I have not seen any private equity organization be egregious about their approach to what they want to pay for space. By the same token,
I would agree with that.
Be a little bit careful about killing the goose that laid the golden egg, because many practices are not located in an area where maybe it would be that easy to lease the space if there weren't another optometrist there. And so having that one stability, because you've sold into a large consortium of optometrists that are not dependent on just your local economy, and so they could weather the storm of maybe a momentary change in your local economy, or uh, as happened in the past couple of years, they weathered the storm of a change all over the nation with COVID. So
Yes.
I think the whole real estate conversation is really the icing on the cake if it's done well. Certainly, I would consider that to be maybe the one thing that we did well in our transaction was the real estate contract. And in many of the deals that I think we've participated in the last uh, few years, we've tried to help the optometrists pay close attention to making
Yes.
sure that really is the icing on the cake and the gift that keeps. I call it the icing on the cake or the gift that keeps on giving.
Keeps on giving. And Dr. Cockrell, it's a good point. It seems to me, and this is just kind of anecdotal, but as I think back over all the transactions we've been involved in, where our selling doctors we represented owned real estate, in almost all the cases, with very few exceptions, the firms were very fair and equitable on what they determined fair market rent to be. Because being a large organization and they are used to the triple net concept, which sometimes in a smaller community or just in a peer-to-peer transaction, leases can sometimes just be a gross lease. But most of the private equity firms are very fair, very equitable in terms of establishing what on a per square footage basis, what is the fair market value for that space, for Class A medical space in your community, and then on top of that, adding triple net, common area maintenance, taxes, and insurance. And in most cases, I just did one this week where there's going to be an inflationary index to those increased CAM costs, those increased triple net costs. So they've agreed on an indice. They're going to use the consumer price index, and they'll adjust annually every year on the anniversary of the lease signing. They'll adjust the triple net based on what the consumer price index for that region of the country has done. So I think they've been pretty fair, at least in my experience. I don't know of any, maybe you do, the private equity that ever wanted to use their money to buy real estate. They just never seemed to, they want to put their money in buying the practices and that cash flow and not the real estate. So if you own real estate, you're right, it's the gift that just keeps on giving, and it can be a tremendous supplement to your retirement income.
It sure can, Bill. I think it's a well-structured real estate lease is critical in this deal.
Yes.
In this deal.
And you think go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. No, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to say, I think the culmination of your real estate lease, along with your closing of your deal, is what I call the home free section of your transaction.
Yeah, I would agree, and you think about the age, not always, but in most cases, by the time someone is contemplating selling 100% of their practice, their building is most likely free and clear, and so the rental income and the CAM fees make that a tremendous stream of income, depending on the size of the building and the part of the country. But generally, it's a pretty good stream of income to the selling doctor or doctor partners, and again, the real estate sometimes is that kind of hidden gem that nobody thinks about that comes up kind of almost tangentially late in the transaction. But I agree, it's a really critical piece.
I do too, Bill, and I sure have appreciated you and allowing me to be involved in this conversation, especially kind of giving the perspective of an optometrist. Because I'd like to just take a couple of minutes and admit some of the things that I wasn't aware of. I wouldn't necessarily say I did them wrong. I'd say I wasn't aware of, and they created a different outcome. I chose the outcome in the end, but in my own particular case, we did not sell our practice to private equity. We didn't entertain the thought. And so, while I don't mind one way or another what a practice does, they need to do what's right in their heart. And you talk about that many times, Bill, is the psychological impact of selling something that you worked hard on, and you worked in a vein. You worked in a vein of independent optometry for most of your career, and so did I. And I was a fiercely independent optometrist who was involved at my state level, the national level, and organizationally, and in scope legislation during my career. And so, kind of a fairly fierce advocate of independent optometry. But financially, I don't have any real regrets here because life has treated me well anyway. But I didn't entertain the thought of selling to private equity, and for that, on a pure numbers basis, not a psychological basis or not any other basis, just on a pure numbers basis, there's literally no comparison in what would have happened in that transaction. So, kind of in closing for me in this is, one, I didn't seek representation to even find out what might happen if I did entertain that, and I must admit I received a letter from a group that represented private equity, and I threw it in the trash. And I've thought about that many times. I didn't even give that group the opportunity to talk to me about what the possibilities might be. It's a free country. I still have the right to make my own decision, and I might have made the same decision. I don't know, but what I do know is I didn't create the opportunity to gain the knowledge to know the difference. And so on a pure numbers basis, it's a good thing that we had a pretty successful practice over time, because I didn't capitalize on that the way a real business person would have, and fortunately, that didn't impact my life much, but it still was not a necessarily what you would call it wasn't the decision that I ended up making. It was the way I made the decision.
Yeah.
I didn't gain the knowledge to make a well-informed decision. So I would encourage our listeners, at least gain the knowledge to feel like you made a well-informed decision on who you're selling your practice to, and then what's going to happen after that, and your chances of being happier in your situation, I think, will be elevated quite a bit. And then, even though I'm on the other side of the equation now, every time I see an optometrist negotiate their own deal, I feel sad, because there's just no comparison in what happens in those and I know that I'm speaking maybe in what would appear to be a self-serving state right now. I really, from the bottom of my heart, are speaking from my colleagues, in that a doctor who treats himself as a fool for a patient.
Right. Very good. Well said. Well, again, thank you, Dr. Cockrell, for joining us in this series. I think your insights have been very good and some real practical takeaways for your colleagues around the country. Really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. And doctors, if those of you who are looking for some information, first of all, the series will be up. We'll have it up on YouTube, so you can view it at your leisure. And if you want some more information and just no obligation chat about private equity or transitioning your practice, you can reach us at info@thewilliamsway.com. And again, Dr. Cockrell, thank you very much for taking time to join us, and very insightful on all the different issues that are germane to one of these transactions. It was very helpful. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, Bill. And as you know, you are very early partner in Williams Group, and really it was founded on the auspices of helping optometrists realize better practices, realize a better life. And Dr. Brad Williams was the original founder. You were here shortly after that, along with other people. And I'd like to think that we're still helping to further that original mission of trying to help optometrists have better lives, better quality of life, and better outcomes in the end. So this last few years have been a great pleasure for me, and it's been a tremendous evolution in what's possible in an optometry practice. And so if you feel like you're not as knowledgeable as you'd like to be, we'd sure love to help you. And
yes,
thanks again for the opportunity to talk a little bit about it, Bill.
Yep, well said. And I couldn't agree more. I think that original mission is alive and well. And thanks, Dr. Cockrell, very much. And thank you, colleagues, for joining us today.